Chapter 19, Unfairness and What to Do About It.
Oh. Hello. Chapter 19, Unfairness and What to Do About It. In the days after the hateful words had been scrawled on the wall, Dune went to work grudgingly. He didn't want to work with people who did such awful things. He had to remind himself that they weren't all ignorant brutes, and that they were still giving the Emberites shelter and food, even though they were no longer allowing them to eat with their lunchtime families, and even though they were planning to send them out to fend for themselves in the winter. But the people who had written those words, no one was trying to find out who they were. No one was punishing them. Who was the one getting the evil looks and being called bad names? He was. He who had done nothing. He couldn't stand the wrongness of it. He felt it physically, as if he were wearing clothes that were too tight, a shirt that pinched him under the arms, pants that were too short, too snug. Unfair, unfair, he kept thinking. He couldn't bear unfairness. One day he was assigned to clean the fountain in the center of the plaza. Chugger handed him tools for the job, a bucket, a long stick with a metal scraper on one end, and a pile of rags. Chugger lifted up one of the bricks in the pavement near the fountain. Under it was a round handle. "You turn this off first," he said. "It shuts off the water coming in from the river." He gave it several turns, and the spouting water in the middle of the fountain dipped and vanished. "Now the water in the basin will drain out through the outflow pipe," Chugger said. "It goes back into the river. When the basin is empty, you climb in there and scrub. I want this thing clean as a drinking glass when you're through." Chugger left. Dune watched the water level slowly going down. The lower it got, the more green scum was revealed. It coated the inside of the fountain with slimy fur. He plunged his stick into the water, scraped it along the fountain's inner wall, and pulled it out again. Wet green strings swung from the end of it, and he shook them off into the bucket. He thrust the stick in again, scraped again, brought out more muck. Into the bucket it went. For the next 10 minutes, he scraped the bottom and sides of the fountain with his stick and filled the bucket with the slippery strands of scum, along with a few apricot pits, dead bugs, and rotting leaves. The water was about half gone now, but it seemed to be draining very slowly. Probably, Dune reasoned, this was because the outflow pipe was getting blocked up with some of the loosened scum being drawn towards it. But because the water was so murky, he couldn't see where the outflow pipe was. At that moment, Chugger came up behind him. "What the heck is taking it so long?" he said. "If you had any more sense, you'd have figured out the drain is clogging up." He grabbed the stick out of Dune's hands and began probing the water. "I did figure it out," Dune said. I couldn't see where it was because—" "There," said Chugger, who wasn't listening. He'd pried loose a clump of soggy crud, and the water level was once more going down. He thrust the stick towards Dune again. "Now get busy and try using your brain once in a while. Shh, if you have one." He stalked off. Dune clamped his teeth together to hold in the rage boiling up in him. He glared at the retreating back of Chugger and imagined throwing his stick at the back and it. He glared at the retreating back of Chugger and imagined throwing his stick so that it hit him right between the shoulder blades. "I hate being talked to that way," he thought. "As if I'm a moron. Why does he get to talk to me like that?" When the water had all drained out of the fountain, Dune took his shoes off, grabbed a handful of rags, and climbed in. On his knees in the green slime that covered the bottom, he wiped and scrubbed. Now and then people came by and peered in at him. "Ugh," they'd say as they passed, or "Yuck." It felt as if they were saying "ugh" and "yuck" about him. Not surprising, since he was now just about as filthy as the rags he was using. No one said "good job," or said they were pleased the fountain was getting cleaned. When he finally finished, he opened the inflow valve and plugged the outflow valve, and once again the water leapt from the central pipe and the fountain began to fill. Dune sat down on the rim and put his bare feet in the water to rinse them off. He stayed there for a minute, resting. The cool, clean water felt good. Chugger came around the corner. "What are you doing?" he yelled. He strode towards Dune. "I don't know where you do it, or how you do it where you're from," he said, "but here when we work, we work. We don't sit around gazing at the sky." Dune started to say he was not gazing at the sky, he was taking a 1-minute rest. But when he opened his mouth to speak, the rush of anger that came through his body was so volcanic that he closed his mouth again and sat there shaking. His face flushed and burning, afraid he would explode, afraid he would explode if he tried to say a word. "Don't get angry," he told himself, remembering the advice his father had given him so many times. When anger is in control, you get unintended consequences. "You don't speak when you're spoken to," said Chugger. "Maybe you didn't hear me. Maybe I need to make it clearer." He took a deep breath. His voice came out in a hoarse bellow. "Get moving, you stupid barbarian! You are... Ugh! Now!" He seized Dune by the arm and yanked him backwards. That was when Dune felt his rage shooting up like steam, unstoppable. "Let go of me!" he screamed. "I am not a barbarian! You are! You are!" He tried to jerk away from Chugger, but Chugger held on. Dune pulled harder, wrenching his whole body sideways and slamming against the bucket, which was next to him on the rim of the fountain. The bucket went flying, spewing its slimy contents over a girl who happened to be passing by. She screamed and slapped at the stinking sludge running down the front of her shirt. People rushed up to her and shouted angrily at Dune, who gave one more frantic pull and finally freed himself from Chugger's grasp. For a second, he and Chugger stood glaring at each other. Dune knew how he must look to the people around him, clumsy, filthy, wild-eyed, and worse than that, a violent boy. The kind of boy who would waste good food. The kind of boy whose ugly, fiery temper could cause real damage. He turned and stalked away. No one tried to stop him. He realized when he'd gone a short distance that he'd forgotten to pick up his shoes, but he wasn't going to go back for them. He ran barefoot all the way back to the Pioneer. "I've done it now," he thought. "I've made everything worse. And yet none of it is my fault. I was trying hard to do my job and trying even harder not to get angry. But look what happens. The unfairness of it, the tremendous injustice, felt like a stone in his heart." "We will do something about this," Tick said to Dune that night. They were standing by the hotel's back stairs, where they'd encountered each other on the way in from the outhouses. "You are being abused. We all are. We mustn't stand for it." Dune nodded. He had told Tick about Winter, and now Tick was more outraged than ever. The look on his face was hard and determined. Dune admired Tick's strength, and the way he always seemed to know what to do. He himself was never so absolutely clear. He saw too many sides of things. It confused him. "What should we do?" he asked. "Strike back," said Tick. "They have attacked us more than once in many ways. It's time for them to find out. If they hurt us, they'll get hurt too." They'll get hurt? Was this the right thing? But it did seem fair. After all, wrong should be punished. "How do we do it?" said Dune. "Many possibilities," said Tick. He leaned against the wall beside the stairs. He had a red patch on his arm. Dune noticed that he kept scratching at it. It was the first time Dune had seen that Tick, too, suffered from the bites and scrapes that plagued the rest of them. He isn't perfect, Dune reminded himself. He isn't always right about everything. "We could refuse to work," Tick went on. "But everyone would have to refuse, and I'm not sure everyone would. It would be better to take direct action." "Action about what?" asked Dune. "About food. We don't get enough. This is an injustice all of us feel. So, what about this? We storm the storehouses and take what we need by force." "Steal food?" said Dune. "It isn't stealing, it's evening things out. It's getting what should be rightfully ours." There was not a hint of uncertainty in Tick's voice. Dune thought about this. It did make sense. You had to act against injustice, didn't you? You couldn't just let it happen. "I know a lot of people who will join us," Tick said. "I'll call them together. We'll have a meeting and make a plan." He started up the stairs and then turned around and looked down at Dune. "But first," he said, "we have to arm ourselves." "We do?" "Of course! We need to make sure we'll defeat our enemy." "What do we arm ourselves with?" "I'll tell you," Tick said, "when we meet tomorrow night, after dinner, out at the head of the road."